Thank you very much, not only for that contribution, but for all floor speeches. We're now going to turn back to our paper speakers. Speaking third in proposition is Tobias Ellwood. Tobias Ellwood is a former British Army officer, senior UK parliamentarian, and now writer and commentator for national security and foreign policy issues. He served as Foreign Minister for the Middle East, Defence Minister, and most recently as chair of the House of Commons Defence Committee. He led the Defence Committee on dozens of visits and published reports covering global threats, defence procurement, grey zone warfare, Ukraine, and the Middle East. Tobias Ellwood, you have the ears of the House.
Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. It's delightful to be here and to join my esteemed colleagues to support the motion today. I'm just absorbing this moment for a second because I wasn't clever enough to get into Cambridge. I managed to just squeeze into Loughborough. Loughborough is a real university. We not only do win sports games, we win the fight afterwards. But just allow me just to absorb this. It was my sister, who was a graduate at Oxford, who said, Tobias, so you're going to do a lot of things with your life, but I don't think academically you're never going to make it to Cambridge. Here I am. So just allow me. But the other reason why it's a pleasure to be here is to be amongst you, because you are the clever generation that's moving forward. You are the next generation of industrialists, of economists, of academics, of military leaders, and indeed of politicians. You are the future leaders of Britain and other countries around the world by the very fact that you are here today. I have some bad news. We're in for extremely bumpy decade internationally. It's been touched on already. With your indulgence, Mr. President, please put your hand up if you think in the next 5 years the world is going to become less dangerous and less stable. Put your hand up if you think it's going to become less dangerous, and more stable. Put your hand up if you think that's going to happen. I can't find one hand, which means if I ask the question, do you think that one hand? Well, a slim chance. But the majority of us are feeling it, that our world is changing. And we need to do something about it. And that's why we're speaking about this debate here today. There is a 1937 feeling to the world right now. Okay? There's authoritarianism is on the rise. Countries are starting to rearm. State-on-state conflict is back. That's one of the big challenges that we see today. And we see an absence of Western agreement as to where we go. There's Westlessness has come about. We are risk-averse in dealing with the challenges that are coming over the hill. And we saw that in Ukraine. And you're absolutely right about Iraq. We shouldn't have gone in there. That was a mistake. And I said that before we went in. We damaged our international reputation of interventionism when that happened. But the point, though, is that we are here today, and it's worse than 1937. Of when we're heading towards a potential conflict. Not World War III as in World War II, but a world at conflict. And it's worse than 1937 because you've also got the advance of technology, which is falling into non-state actors' hands, which makes all the more dangerous the world that we're actually in. And adds to that the impact of climate change as well. Because you're going to see mass migration across places like Africa when that becomes uninhabitable. Our world is going to struggle to put all these things together as globalization dies. We're not working together, we're becoming isolationist and we're becoming protectionist. Is Donald Trump the answer? Probably not in these sort of situations here, because America First is all about retreating, recognizing where our world's going. And there's an axis that's developing here, an axis of Russia, China, and Iran. And I say those, I don't mean to insult any of those students that may come from those places. It's Beijing, it's Tehran, and of course, it's Moscow, the Kremlin too. These are three countries that should have nothing to do with each other. Russia and China, if you know your history, almost went to war together in the 1960s. I'm not going to take place, I've got a lot to get through, but if there's time at the end, I'll come back to you. You have Iran and Russia. If you know, again, if you're familiar with the history, Russia and Britain were walking all over Persia, as it then was, taking the oil and dominating it. And of course, China and Iran have no long-term relationship. Iran blamed China for the Wuhan flu. Yet here they are, these countries coming together, taking advantage of the inability of our world order to be strong enough to stand up to the changes that are taking place. They are advocating an alternative vision, an alternative view as to where our world should go. And that is very dangerous indeed, and we have no strategy to deal with that. Now, 2.2% has been mentioned for GDP. But actually, take away the defense capability, the nuclear capability, you're actually down to 1.6%. And that means that our defense posture is not enough. And it's the character of warfare that's changing. And we touched on this as well. The cyber attacks that are taking place on Britain every single day. Russia, Moscow, is at war with Britain economically, trying to cause us economic harm, to sow political division, to cause disharmony amongst our society. Whether it's clipping those cables, the undersea cables, or indeed it's actually sending messages and disinformation in our systems, or sending drones up the actual Thames and so forth. These are the daily attacks that are causing us to be distracted, but beneath the threshold of war. We are in a gray zone war, and we're simply not ready for it at all. And AI has been mentioned. This is going to be bigger as a threat than nuclear power, than nuclear bombs were when that came about. There are no rules. And if you harness AI as we move forward, quantum computing and so forth, you can actually have the advantage on running your machinery, your military, into such a state that you can actually interfere with our own military as well. That's the cleverness of AI that's coming over the hill. There is an AI arms race. I'll briefly give way. Grab some water. Go ahead. Some water, please. Water. You've got to put all that.
Wouldn't you say that more effective in crushing instead of expanding?
Well, what I would say is, and it's been interesting, this debate, we've got involved in aircraft carriers, in HMS Albion. This is all the details and what our defense posture should be. I'm making the simple case that our world's getting more dangerous, not less. We've agreed with that. We had a vote on it. What are we going to do about it? And what I would say is that the state of our armed forces cannot cope. It's been mentioned already, the size of our Navy. At the end of the Cold War, we had 1,200 battle tanks. Today, we have 148. We had 36 fast jet squadrons. Today, we have 6. But it isn't about the Army, Air Force, and Navy. It's not about land, air, and sea. It's about these other dimensions, including space as well, where we have no idea what's going on. And the capabilities that are being developed, particularly by China, to disrupt what's going up there is huge, and we're simply not ready for it. Now, one question has been said, can we actually afford it? Because, of course, we want to spend money on health. We want to spend money on those hospitals. But it's been made already, I think, by some of the interventions. If we don't look after our economy, then our security is then affected as well. If we don't look after our security, our economy is affected. And those grain ships coming out of Odessa, or those other shipping that goes round the Red Sea, it was British ships there that went to defend international waters because of what the Houthis were doing. Now look what China is doing in the South China Sea with all those Parcel Islands and so forth. Look what's happening in other parts of the world. We embrace globalization like no other country, and now we're being affected by it. Half of our GDP is subject to international headwinds. And if we don't take an interest as to what's happening abroad, it then affects our economy. So during COVID, during the Ukraine crisis, food inflation went up 19%. That affected every aspect of everything in the supermarket. Now that also means that the Treasury doesn't have any money for hospitals, for policing, for transport. They are all interrelated. Security and our economy are one and the same thing. And I stress that from where I sit and where I look, our world is splintering into two spheres of competing influence. It's getting very dangerous indeed. We lent on the United Nations, and it was mentioned, those Bretton Woods organizations that we helped craft together after the Second World War, after we went to the abyss, to try and form some form of global peace. And the two principal organizations that allow our world to run, the UN is now paralyzed because of the veto at the Security Council. And the World Trade Organization isn't working, which means that people are not able to trade on the equal terms that we're supposed to. That's a very dangerous place indeed. And there's this thing called the Thucydides trap, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. China, in our lifetime, will challenge America's dominance militarily, electronically, and digitally as well as from an economic perspective, which they've already done. When that happens, what are we going to do about it? And these are the big challenges that Britain should be thinking about, because it is in our DNA to step forward, as we've done in the past, to look over the hill and say what's coming, and rally other friends, other allies to look for those solutions, peaceful solutions, the off-ramp to avoid a world going to conflict. We're not doing that, I can tell you that. I've just spent 19 years in Parliament, and we get distracted by the minutiae. And certainly my party was in complete disarray. We weren't going to be leading anywhere. But even today I look in Parliament, and it's Churchill's anniversary of Churchill's death today. How many MPs do we need to get in there to get one Churchill? Well, that's where you guys come in, because you are the next generation of leaders. And this is going to be a bumpy decade, a decision when we have to work out where our world is going, because our global order is fragmented right now. Our global order is on its edge. And we know that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are pursuing a very different model. I'm out of time, apologies. Backing up from China is the One Belt, One Road. Over 120 countries have signed up to the One Belt, One Road program. They are indebted to China and will not challenge China at the United Nations. That, I'm afraid, whether you like it or not, that's the difficulties that we face. And that's where leadership is absolutely required. I want to see Britain take that leadership up. We can only do so if we advance our defense posture. That's exactly what we must do, and that's why I ask you today to support this motion. Thank you.